I've been in this game for decades, seen how the machine really works, and I'm here to pull back the curtain for you. We're going to start with one of the most dangerous traps that the low and middle income folks get sucked into: debt. But not just any debt, the kind of debt that banks and the wealthy want you to fear, while they sit there using it like a magic money-making tool. Let's break it down, and I'm telling you this straight. Every step of the way comes from real-life cases I've been a part of or directly observed in my career. Let me take you back to the early 2000s. I'm working in this financial firm, right? Fresh off the dot-com crash. And you've got people left and right trying to figure out how to rebuild their wealth. Meanwhile, the rich, they're out here buying up everything. Real estate, stocks, bonds, you name it. And they're not using their own money either. Oh no, they're using debt, cheap debt. Money from the banks at interest rates that make you think they've got some sort of insider deal. I'm sitting there thinking, why on earth would these guys who have millions of dollars borrow money instead of using their cash? Well, here's the dirty little secret I learned. Debt is the rich person's best friend. Why? Because they can borrow at, say, 3% or 4%, and then turn around and invest that borrowed money in something that pays them 8%, 10%, maybe even more. Take this one client I had, Steve. We'll call him Steve. Mid-40s, successful entrepreneur, and he'd been buying real estate like candy. Now, he wasn't paying cash for these properties. Oh no, he was leveraging them, borrowing 80% of the property value, sometimes more. His entire strategy was to use as little of his own money as possible. Every time the bank gave him a loan at 4%, he'd put it into properties that were yielding him around 12% annually. He'd collect the rent, pay off the loan interest, and pocket the difference. He wasn't just making a profit. He was multiplying his wealth using borrowed money. And I'm standing there realizing that this guy is literally printing money while regular folks are out here working overtime just to pay off their mortgage faster because they've been told debt is bad. So what's the lesson here? Don't be afraid of debt if you know how to use it right. The rich are out here borrowing money to buy things that make them money. Real estate, dividend-paying stocks, businesses, you name it. They don't pay off their homes early. They leverage them to buy more assets. Now, that's not to say you should go max out your credit cards. Nope, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about smart debt, cheap debt, debt tied to income-producing assets. And hey, if you're liking what I'm saying already, hit that like button. It helps more people get this kind of knowledge. And trust me, I'm just getting warmed up. Now let me tell you about another story. This one from 2008, the middle of the housing crisis. Oh man, this was a wild time. People were losing their homes left and right. And what were the banks doing? Were they trying to help people? No, not exactly. The banks were busy scooping up properties themselves, along with private equity firms, hedge funds, big players. I had a client, let's call him Mike. Mike had been doing well. Mid-level manager, 2 kids, living the American dream. He was on track to pay off his house in 15 years. Now, here's where the problem comes in. Mike, like so many others, had been told that the best thing he could do was pay off his mortgage as fast as possible, because debt is bad, right? So what does he do? He pours every extra penny into his mortgage, trying to get that free and clear feeling. Well, then the crisis hits. His company downsizes, and suddenly Mike's got no job, no income. He's got a house that's almost paid off. But the problem? He's got no liquidity. He's house rich but cash poor. And guess what the bank told him when he came in asking for help? Sorry, you can refinance, but we'll need to see proof of income first. Problem is, Mike doesn't have income anymore, so refinancing isn't an option. He ends up losing the house because all his money was tied up in paying off that mortgage, rather than keeping some cash on hand for emergencies. Now contrast that with Steve, who I told you about earlier. Steve was leveraging debt left and right, but when the crisis hit, he wasn't worried. Why? Because he had cash on hand. He wasn't pouring everything into paying off his properties. He was leveraging them. He had a strategy in place, and he didn't panic when the market tanked. In fact, he bought more properties while everyone else was selling. I watched this guy double his net worth in the span of a couple of years, just by having liquidity and not being afraid of debt. What's the takeaway? Don't treat debt like it's the enemy. Smart debt, debt tied to something that's making you money, is your friend. It's a tool. Use it to your advantage. And for the love of everything, don't pour all your cash into paying off your mortgage early if it means you're left with nothing in the bank. Keep liquidity. Have options. Now, drop a comment below if you've ever been in a situation where debt saved you or burned you. I want to hear about your experiences. We're all learning here. And sometimes the best lessons come from sharing those war stories. All right, we're moving on to one of the shadiest yet most commonly pushed financial products out there. HELOCs, home equity lines of credit. This one's personal for me because I've seen how these things can backfire if you don't know what you're doing. I had a client, Sarah, mid-30s, single mom, and she'd been doing well, saving up, and finally bought her first home. She's proud, right? She should be. So after a few years, she's built up some equity in the house, and the bank comes knocking, telling her about this fantastic new product, HELOC. They're like, you've got all this equity just sitting there. Why not unlock it? You can use it to pay off your credit cards, fix up the house, take a vacation. And on the surface, it sounds great, right? Low interest line of credit, flexible payments, easy access to cash. But here's where it gets ugly. Sarah takes out a HELOC and uses it to pay down her credit card debt, thinking she's being responsible. But a year later, things take a turn. She loses her job, and suddenly, those flexible payments aren't so flexible anymore. The interest rate on the HELOC adjusts, and now she's paying more than she ever expected. And the worst part? It's tied to her house. If she can't make those payments, she could lose the whole house. The same bank that told her how great a HELOC was now doesn't care if she's struggling. They just want their money. Here's the lesson. HELOCs can be a useful tool, but only if you're using them strategically. If you're going to tap into the equity in your home, you better be investing that money into something that gives you a higher return than what you're paying in interest. If you're just using it to pay off other debts or to fund a lifestyle you can't afford, you're setting yourself up for disaster. If you've been pitched a HELOC before, or you're thinking about one now, let me know in the comments. There's a right way and a wrong way to use them. And trust me, you want to avoid the wrong way at all costs. All right, let's talk about mortgages, specifically adjustable rate mortgages, ARMs. Man, these things are like financial time bombs waiting to go off. I remember back in the early 2000s, I had a client. Let's call him Tom. Now, Tom's the kind of guy who listens to all the hot tips, right? He comes to me one day, grinning ear to ear, and says, "Hey, I just got this killer mortgage deal. Low interest for the first 5 years, adjustable rate after that. But by then, I'll be swimming in equity, and I'll just refinance." Sure. I've heard this line 1,000 times before. And you know what happened? By the time that 5-year grace period was up, the interest rate on his ARM shot through the roof. Like, I'm talking a couple of $100 more every month. Tom's scrambling, trying to figure out what to do because suddenly his affordable mortgage isn't so affordable anymore. And refinancing? Well, turns out his credit took a hit during that time because life happens, and now refinancing isn't even an option. He's stuck with these ballooning payments and no way out. The thing about ARMs is that they look great on paper in the beginning. Low rates, everything seems manageable. And banks love to sell you on the fact that rates might not go up that much. But guess what? They can and often do. It's like walking into a casino where the house is betting against you. Sure, maybe you win for a little while, but in the long run, they know you're going to lose. So here's the takeaway. If you're thinking about getting a mortgage, avoid ARMs like the plague. Go for a fixed-rate mortgage where you know exactly what you're paying every month for the life of the loan. Don't gamble with your home. And if you're already in an ARM, look into refinancing now before those rates adjust upward. Trust me, you do not want to be in Tom's shoes, scrambling to make payments when the rates go up. Now, if you've ever been caught in an ARM trap or you're dealing with one right now, drop a comment below. I want to know how you're handling it because, believe me, you're not alone in this. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about real estate. And I mean real real estate. You ever wonder why it feels like buying a home is getting harder and harder? Like, no matter what you do, you're getting outbid, priced out, or just plain shut out of the market. Well, let me tell you something that not many people realize. You're not just competing against other homebuyers like yourself. You're competing against hedge funds and private equity firms. Yeah, you heard that right. I'm talking about big institutions coming into your neighborhood, buying up homes by the dozens, sometimes hundreds. I had a friend, Jenny, back in 2013, trying to buy her first home. She was out there hustling, going to open houses, putting in bids, doing all the right things. But every time she found a place she liked, bam, it was gone. Snatched up by some cash buyer. Turns out, these buyers weren't regular folks. They were private equity groups, buying up homes to rent them out. Now, why does this matter? Well, here's the dirty little secret. These hedge funds and firms don't care about home ownership. They care about turning properties into cash cows. They buy these homes with dirt cheap financing. We're talking loans at 2 to 3% interest rates that the average person can only dream about. Then they rent them back to you at inflated prices. So not only are you getting priced out of the buying market, but now you're stuck paying higher rent to these same institutions that made it impossible for you to buy in the first place. It's a vicious cycle, and it's rigged against you. Here's the action step. Don't over-leverage yourself just to get into the real estate market. If prices are skyrocketing and you're finding yourself stretching thin, it's not worth it. Instead, look at alternative investments like REITs, real estate investment trusts. These let you invest in real estate without having to buy a whole property, so you still get a piece of the pie, but without putting your financial future on the line. And if you're in the rental market, start looking at markets or areas where these big firms haven't taken over yet. You might find better deals in up-and-coming neighborhoods where institutional money hasn't swooped in. I know this might be a little frustrating to hear, but trust me, knowing the game means you can play it better. If you've had a tough time buying a house, or you've noticed these institutional buyers muscling in, share your story below. I want to hear how it's impacting you and what strategies you found to deal with it. Now, let's get into something that I personally find to be one of the biggest scams in modern finance. Student loans. Yeah, I'm going there. I'm talking about the dirty little deal between colleges and banks that nobody wants to talk about. You see, colleges have zero incentive to keep tuition down. Why? Because they know that no matter how high they jack up the price, banks are more than happy to hand out loans like candy. I had this client, let's call her Emma, smart as a whip, wanted to be an engineer, and got accepted into one of those prestigious schools. Problem? The school's tuition was through the roof, and her family wasn't exactly sitting on piles of cash. So like millions of others, she took out loans. Big loans. I mean, six-figure loans. The school's financial aid office gave her the full pitch. Don't worry, your future earnings as an engineer will more than cover this. Yeah, right. What they didn't tell her was that these loans were structured in a way that would keep her in debt for the next 20 to 30 years. They weren't just covering tuition, they were pushing loans for living expenses, books, everything. The school was essentially acting as a funnel, pushing her into the arms of the loan servicers. And the kicker? Once she graduated, she found out that her loan payments were way more than she could handle, even with a decent starting salary. The interest started piling up, and before she knew it, she was paying more in interest than she was on the actual loan. She came to me, frazzled, saying, how is this even legal? And I just had to shake my head because, technically, it is. Here's the takeaway. If you're thinking about going to college or sending your kids to college, you need to be smart about how much debt you take on. Look into community colleges, trade schools, or certifications that offer a better return on investment. The idea that you have to go to a fancy 4-year university to be successful, that's a myth. And if you've already got student loan debt, look into refinancing or consolidation options to get that interest rate down. It's all about getting out of debt faster and smarter. And hey, if this student loan story hit home for you, whether you're drowning in debt or just starting to think about college, subscribe to the channel. I've got more advice coming that can help you navigate this student loan minefield without losing your financial future in the process. Alright, now we're diving into peer-to-peer lending. This one's not as flashy as student loans or real estate, but it's a game changer if you know how to use it right. And, funny story, the banks hate this. I remember back when I first heard about peer-to-peer lending platforms like Lending Club or Prosper. I was still working on the inside of a big financial institution. Let me tell you, the higher-ups were nervous. They didn't say it out loud, but you could feel it. See, these platforms cut out the middleman, the banks. So what's the deal? Peer-to-peer lending is basically where regular people lend to other regular people without a bank getting involved. If you need a loan, instead of going to a bank, you can go to one of these platforms and get a loan funded by everyday folks. And if you have extra cash, you can be one of those people lending out money, earning interest, essentially playing the role of the bank. I had a buddy, let's call him Dave, who got involved early. He's one of those guys who's always looking for angles, right? So Dave starts putting his money into peer-to-peer lending. He wasn't a Wall Street guy, but he knew enough to see a good opportunity when it came knocking. At first, he was lending small amounts, $50 here, $100 there. But it started to add up. He was pulling in solid returns, around 7 to 9% annually, which is way better than parking his cash in a savings account earning, what, 0.01%? Fifth? Laughable. And the beauty of it? The banks couldn't get their hands on it. Now, Dave wasn't taking on crazy risks. He was smart about diversifying his loans. He wasn't putting all his money into one borrower. He spread it out over dozens of people. And here's the kicker. While Dave was out there earning interest, the banks were still trying to figure out how to bring people back into their system. But people were waking up to the fact that they didn't need banks for everything anymore. So what's the lesson here? Peer-to-peer lending can be a great way to both borrow and invest. If you're looking for a loan, but don't want to deal with banks and their ridiculous fees, check out one of these platforms. You can often get a lower interest rate, and the terms are usually more transparent. On the flip side, if you've got some cash sitting around and you're tired of the pathetic returns from traditional savings accounts, consider becoming a lender. It's risky, sure, but with the right strategy, you can minimize those risks and make some decent returns. And hey, if you've ever tried peer-to-peer lending, whether as a borrower or a lender, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your experiences and see how it's working for you. This community is all about sharing knowledge, so let's get into it. Now, I'm about to drop some final thoughts here, and these are important, so let's bring it all together. We've talked about debt, HELOCs, ARMs, real estate, student loans, peer-to-peer lending. It all points to one big truth. The system is designed to keep you dependent on the banks. The rich, the big institutions, they know how to use debt to make money. They know how to leverage the system to get richer while everyone else is just trying to stay afloat. And the banks, they don't care if you win or lose, as long as you keep paying them interest. That's the game. And it's rigged in their favor. But now you know how to flip that script. You know how to use debt strategically, how to invest in income-producing assets, how to avoid the traps that banks set. You know how to build wealth without falling into the same old financial traps that keep so many people down. Here's your action plan. 1. If you're carrying credit card debt, tackle it aggressively. Don't let the banks keep you in their minimum payment trap. Pay off the highest interest cards first, and don't take the bait when they offer to increase your limit. 2. If you've got a mortgage, make sure it's a fixed rate one. Avoid ARMs at all costs, and if you're stuck in one, look into refinancing before those rates start climbing. 3. Be cautious with HELOCs. Only use them if you've got a clear plan to invest the money in something that will give you a higher return than what you're paying in interest. Otherwise, don't touch it. 4. Don't get pressured into buying a home just because it feels like the right thing to do. If institutional buyers are flooding the market, consider waiting, looking for alternative investments, or even renting in areas they haven't dominated yet. 5. If you're dealing with student loan debt, look into refinancing options. But more importantly, if you or someone you know is considering taking on student loan, think hard about the return on investment. Don't get sucked into the prestigious university myth. 6. Finally, If you're tired of the banks controlling your financial future, explore peer-to-peer lending. It's a way to break free from the traditional system and get better returns on both sides of the lending equation. And hey, before I wrap this up, if you've been getting value from this, make sure to subscribe. I'm going to keep dropping real, actionable financial advice like this, stuff that actually helps you get ahead. We're not here to play by the bank's rules. We're here to rewrite the rule book.